Could I get a show of hands for people who are currently working as software engineers, as developers? Cool. How many of you guys have been coding for less than 2 years? Awesome. And who has been coding between 2 to 5 years? Awesome. And who has been coding longer? Whoa, cool. So a good spread. So of those engineers, how many of you guys have done any sort of teaching while you guys were developers, whether it's hosting brown bags, giving technical talks, mentoring? Cool. So today I wanted to talk about how, from my personal experience, how powerful teaching can be as a tool for learning as we progress through our careers as developers. There's a sense that once we get a job as a software engineer, progress kind of comes automatically. But we all unfortunately know engineers who've been in the industry for many years, for decades, and many kind of stay at the same level as far as skill set or like job roles. We also know developers who kind of tie themselves to a sort of technology and find that their skill set is a little bit irrelevant once that technology goes out of vogue. And so what I want to talk about is, by being thoughtful about where we want to go and how we want to keep fleshing out our toolbox as developers, we can use teaching to kind of level up consistently as developers. So before I go into that, I want to introduce myself. This is obviously a very outdated picture. But my name is Esther, and I'm currently working at a digital consulting company called Presence. And what we do is we build products for our clients, whether that's mobile apps or websites, or even now hardware and VR projects. I personally specialize in full stack JavaScript, so I've been working a lot with React apps, Node apps, Angular apps, and I actually teach the React and Node workshops for Girl Develop It, which is a SF-based nonprofit here. And I think from my experience teaching with Girl Develop It and through the different opportunities that I've been given, I've found that it's given me a more comprehensive understanding of the technologies I work with, and it also has made me a fuller and more engaged member of the tech community here in the Bay Area. So before I go into the solution, I want to go into what the problem that I see is. And the way I see it is that there are two main walls people hit when they code. I think the first wall is the one that most people who said that they've been coding for 2 years or less have probably experienced the most recently, if they're not experiencing it now. And that first wall is responsible for deterring a lot of people from pursuing a development as a career. So I personally come from a non-technical background as well. I went to school for English and film, and I worked in filmmaking for a few years, and so I know the soul-crushing frustration of getting into a programming. So I think this first wall is kind of a struggle against gaining breadth of knowledge. So this is kind of the phase that I like to call the "why am I crying" phase. And this is a year where you're suffering through all these cryptic tutorials. You're going through these blog posts that supposedly are going to help you make this bug go away, but you realize 4 hours in that it's for a version that was released like 3 years ago, or you're up debugging a bug that ends up being a typo or a missed semicolon. And this is kind of where you're trying against all odds just to gain some basic knowledge. So you try to learn more languages, you try to get more green squares on your GitHub account, you try to do all these things to kind of amass just quantity of experience. So I'm sure a lot of people have seen this, but this is kind of your state for the first 2 years. You vacillate between, oh, I can do this, this is amazing, I'm so competent, I'm so amazing, and then I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, why am I here? Why did these people hire me? And then I think a second wall that a lot of people hit when they've been coding for a few years and they feel not as out of their depth is what I like to call the happy plateau. It's the myth of thinking that you know enough. And this is where you kind of go into You know enough to do your job, so there's less urgency and thus less motivation to kind of keep growing and keep pushing yourself as a developer. And you kind of sense a lack of direction because there is no immediate thing to learn to make your life as a developer easier. And also, you don't care so much about breadth of knowledge anymore because you've seen in your 2 years like hot frameworks come and go. So you want some sort of depth of experience or depth of knowledge, but you're not quite sure what that looks like. So first of all, I want to say that plateaus are very natural. So they happen in every aspect of your life. If anyone here is an athlete, you know that all athletes, whatever the sport, they hit some sort of plateau. An example would be like weightlifting. You hit a plateau as far as how much you can lift. Runners, they hit a plateau as far as how fast you can run. Even creatively or intellectually, writers get writer's block. Artists lose their muse. There's all these common scenarios where people reach a plateau. And the plateau that we're really familiar with in Silicon Valley is the trough of sorrow that we hear talked about in TechCrunch so much. And that's the supposed long period of nothing happening before you hypothetically make it big, right? But in short, I think plateaus are normal and an indication that you need to be gearing up for that improvement, for that spike in your chart. You are plateauing because you've adapted well enough to now be thriving in this environment that was initially hostile to you. You didn't know how to code before, but now you do. So now you're plateaued because you feel safe. And I think there's a lot of common causes for this plateau for people who've been coding for a few years. There's lack of opportunities at work to do new, exciting sort of technology work. There are people who work at consulting companies who feel like they jump between too many technologies at once, and so they never get depth of experience. Or the opposite, which is they're restricted to a certain stack, so they never get anything beyond like a mean stack or a lamp stack. Or they're working the same muscles. They're solving the same problems over and over, and it becomes more like carpentry more than coding. And there are these common solutions that people have come up with. If you don't have opportunities, you transfer to a new team or a company, or you enroll in a workshop. If you have too many technologies, you ask your lead to give you projects with certain technologies. If you're restricted to a certain technology, you thoughtfully introduce new libraries or architectures when you think it's reasonable. But I think all those solutions are kind of restricted by your circumstances. You're constrained by what your job allows. You're trying to fix a problem using the same methods that you used to get over the first wall that you hit. So like enrolling in more online courses, just reading more blog posts, going through Stack Overflow. And those are all valid ways to level up. But I think if you're trying to get depth of knowledge, using the same strategies that you used to get breadth of experience, it's not quite as effective. And lastly, because you're restricted by these two things, your personal growth becomes kind of like a chore. It's a secondary pursuit. It's something you do after work. And so this is where I want to introduce teaching as a means to keep forcing yourself to grow in a measured and thoughtful way, in a deliberate way. So I can only speak from my experience. But for me, teaching has allowed me to take control of and kind of customize my personal development and become a more critical and conscientious student. It made me kind of curate what I'd learned already, organize my thoughts, and kind of present it to my students in a way that I know that I, as a student, would have been able to grasp. So I tried to be a better teacher for the student that I was and the teacher that I never had, basically, when I was first getting into development. And could I see a show of hands again of who has never done any sort of teaching or mentoring while they were working as developers? Cool. So I think what kind of stops a lot of people from getting into that is that they don't picture themselves standing in front of a classroom and teaching. But I think before you start thinking down that route of, oh, that's not something I've done before or something I even want to do, I think there are so many different ways that you can kind of get into teaching beyond leading a workshop or having a technical talk. So pair programming kind of has this negative connotation of, oh, this is what you do when you're a new developer and you can't do stuff on your own. You need someone to kind of shepherd you through a task. But I found that when I force myself to pair program with people who are just as experienced or a little bit less experienced than I am, it forces me to kind of articulate the things that I take for granted, that I don't think about, like why I believe those things. And I think there's so many opportunities here in SF to go to like meetup open hours or like study sessions or hackathons or open coding sessions. My company actually partnered with a nonprofit called Code 2040, and they sent us a summer intern. And so all the different engineers at our company paired with our intern, and he obviously learned a lot as well, but we felt like we had to kind of explain to ourselves and to him why it is that we did certain things. So I think that was very valuable. Another way is to volunteer as a TA. For people who are kind of scared of going in full force and teaching a workshop, it kind of allows you to shop around and choose a technology that you want to learn more about, and obviously prepare for it before you go in, but you kind of get to actively learn and teach at the same time. And it's much more immersive than, say, like an online course. And then giving talks, whether they're brown bags or technical talks, because of the limited scope of technical talks, you get to go in really deep and kind of not scare yourself too much with too big of a scope of a topic, and make sure, and basically open yourself up for feedback immediately. So I actually did this recently, or not recently, maybe a year or two ago at my company. I gave a brown bag on ES6, because I had just gotten into writing ES6. And I got immediate feedback on what I didn't know and what I did know. And so I think that immediate feedback on a limited scope of what you learned is great for kind of giving yourself a report card of what you learned properly and what you didn't learn properly. And it kind of gives you pressure to know it well enough to not embarrass yourself. You can also tutor online. Has anyone heard of a website called Hack Hands? I'm sure there are other websites like it as well. But it basically allows you to do pair programming online. And I've used it as a student and really loved it. And I'm actually trying to create some time in my schedule to become a tutor on it as well. But basically, students will log on and say, I need help with Angular, I need help with CSS, I need help with whatever. And they'll connect you with a tutor who can help you with that. So I think that's a really great way to kind of force yourself to review what you already know, because it forces you to make connections that you didn't really articulate to yourself as just a developer. Creating technical resources is also a great way, and this can look like so many different things. It could be technical blog posts, it could be answering Stack Overflow questions, it could be uploading screencasts, it could be creating GISs that kind of compile all the resources that you found helpful. I really like this option because, number one, it's not quote unquote just teaching, so it's a lot easier for people to get into first. And it also kind of continues the tradition, I feel like, of developers kind of helping the next generation of developers. I would not be the developer I am today if I didn't have Stack Overflow, if I didn't have these blog posts that I bookmarked and went back to. So I think this is a really great way to kind of be engaged. And lastly, of course, you can lead a workshop, which is kind of the most scary and intimidating one. But I think from my experience, I feel like I've grown the most as, not even just as a developer, but being able to just articulate why I believe certain things about the technologies that I work with, and being able to build on top of my existing knowledge and think on my feet when I get unexpected questions from students. And so before I wrap up, I want to say, first of all, that if anyone has any questions about how to first get involved in teaching, please find me afterwards, and I can definitely direct you to whatever kind of flavor of teaching you want to do and give you resources to do that. But before I wrap up, I want to talk about another personal reason I find teaching to be really valuable as a developer. So the organization that I work with is called Girl Develop It, and they're a nonprofit that provides affordable opportunities for women interested in software development, and they help women of diverse backgrounds achieve their technology goals, whether that's a career in it or just learning how to write JavaScript. And actually, if anyone wants to start teaching and they haven't taught before, I am actually looking for TAs for 2 upcoming workshops that I'm teaching. So if you're interested in helping out and kind of jumping into this, please let me know. But to return to why I love teaching and why I've done it for my entire career as a developer, I think the developer community is a very inclusive and uplifting one from my experience. I think a lot of us are X's. So I'm an ex-filmmaker. I've met ex-marketers. I've met ex-designers, ex-college dropouts. And for some reason, this industry seems to be so welcoming of people from very diverse backgrounds. And I think my contribution to making that continue to happen is why I like working with Girl Develop It and putting on these different workshops, not necessarily just with them, but with other organizations that try to make this industry as great and as varied as it is. But I'm reminded of a quote that I read recently in an article about a man who found that a piece of software made some racist assumptions about him as a user. And you guys might have read about this. This was maybe a year ago. And his response to the incident was, they say, oh, it's a computer, but it's a computer built by whom, designed by whom, and trained by whom. So that really stuck with me because I think the main reason I like working with Girl Develop It isn't necessarily just because I am a woman and they are women, and I want more women in the industry. I think when we live in a world that's going to be increasingly ruled and kind of dominated by technology, I want that technology to be built by people that have my interests in mind as well, and my ambitions in mind as well, and my concerns in mind as well. So just to wrap up, I encourage everyone, obviously, to work hard to become, great developers, marketable developers, competent developers. There's so much fun to be had building really cool things, really bleeding edge things. But I also encourage everyone, on that note, to remind yourself of why you liked coding in the first place. It doesn't have to be some noble, huge reason. It doesn't have to be because you want to solve world hunger. It could be that you liked building games and you wanted to pass that joy on to the next generation of tech users. It could be that you want to solve world hunger. But I think keeping that reason in mind and wanting to impart it to your students or to your peers or to your coworkers, I think that's what makes coding really fun. Thank you.